I'm Sharada Desai, pursuing MA in Interior Architecture and Design in the University of Hertfordshire. According to the statistics by the UK Green Building Council, construction sector contributes to 23% of air pollution, 50% of the climate change, 40% of drinking water pollution, and 50% of landfill wastes. Apart from this, it also accounts for 40% of worldwide energy usage. Hence, it can contribute significantly to all aspects of sustainable development because of all the major impact building activities have on the environment. Hence, I want to explore more on despite the surge of interest in sustainable development, changes in the construction practices remain relatively slow and the industry lags behind in attaining a satisfactory sustainable future. So the aim for my study is to identify key barriers in construction industry to implement sustainable practices. Also, I'm including some recommendations by industry experts on how to move towards a sustainable future. For this research, I have interviewed Mr. Simon Knight, REBA architect with 15 years of experience in the UK, and Mr. John Nicol, who is also a REBA architect with 30 plus years experience and a self-practitioner in the UK. Both architects have handled wide variety of projects from new builds to extensions in the residential, commercial, and public sectors, and also offer a wide range of construction-related services. My third interviewee is Mr. Professor Peter Guthrie, Director of Research in Sustainable Development in the University of Cambridge. He also chairs Sustainability Panel and the Quality Panel for the Northwest Cambridge Project for the university, National Environment Research Council's Project Advisory Board, member of the Global Agenda Council in Catastrophic Risks in the World Economic Forum, and also he's member of the review panel for the Government of the Living with Environmental Change program, which reported in 2012. After talking to my interviewers and referring to a range of research papers, I have outlined these key barriers which the construction industry currently faces in adopting sustainable practices. Firstly, lack of drive from policymakers. No stricter government policies, building regulations on the construction industry. Secondly, commercial considerations. Client perceives that sustainable construction is more expensive. Thirdly, non-inclusion of sustainability measures as part of co-design process. It's always included as an add-on step in the end of the design process. Finally, inadequate expertise, lack of right information upon which to base decisions, which leads to flawed execution of sustainability by companies.
In fact, in 2006, government did put in a policy that said that all new build homes will be zero carbon by 2016, but unfortunately that was scrapped.
Yeah.
So that there is the ability to really drive policy like that through, and I think it's probably to go to your sort of like your main question of this interview. Really, I think government policy has to be one of the kind of main culprits of why we haven't progressed as far as we should, because I think there's been so many initiatives that have come in and then been U-turned or scrapped, and you need a consistent line to be taken for industry, for professionals to get behind, and because it takes time to change a culture and to change construction methodology and design, and if you've got governments who are being changing those policies, it's not going to make it easy for anyone.
However, the drive often is, with all the commercial constraints, that there's a limit to what you can do, and there's a limit to what clients will accept. Invariably, in my experience, clients, unfortunately, will abide by the rules which government may have set. So with regard to like U value or energy consumption or CO2 emissions, that sort of thing. And that's great, and that's really how it works in my experience with the private sector, that people in the private sector will do what regulation makes them do. Unfortunately, there's very few philanthropic clients or clients perhaps who can think there is a positive advantage of putting solar panels on their building or going above the U value specifications that they need to meet as a minimum. Obviously, architects can help by trying to persuade clients to take on board those features, but I've found it very difficult to actually to get clients to take on board more than they felt they had to achieve. invariably the budget seems to be the biggest constraint. They
Government policy is focused entirely on political will, which means popular decision making, and economic growth.
Yeah.
And economic growth is clearly is counter to any notion of genuine sustainability.
I further inquired with Professor Guthrie, who often works closely with policy-making bodies, if science and evidence-based research can influence policies from the government.
I'm quite close to the National Infrastructure Commission, and we've done work for them. And I was at a meeting, an advisory meeting of the NIC two or 3 weeks ago when they're presenting some draft findings. So I would say that I do have reasonable access to policymakers and decision makers, but the potential to influence and change their behaviour is extremely limited, because the reality is so different from the ambition for sustainability.
Boston Consulting Group and MIT Sloan Management Review carried out a mixed method research involving interview with 50 leaders in sustainability and 1,560 survey response from business leaders, and identified the root cause of difficulties facing organizations pursuing sustainability. This is what they concluded: lack of the right information upon which to base decisions, companies struggle to define the business case for sustainability, and there is a flawed execution of sustainability by companies who act. Professor Guthrie echoed the same fact with an example.
And HS2 is a very good example. HS2 was conceived of and designed as a project to improve capacity between London, Birmingham and the north of England. And very, very late in the day, sustainability considerations were introduced. And so the opportunity for it to become a genuinely identifiably sustainable project has been lost by the time the project has been formulated. And of course, the other really difficult thing with civil engineering is that when you want to do a sustainability assessment of, for example, the third runway at Heathrow, you can't really assess the sustainability aspects of a third runway at Heathrow unless you've designed it. And if you've designed it, then so much effort has gone into how will it be built, what will impact be on the M25 and the A4, and what will be the operational requirements and so on. Once you've got through all of that process to design it so that you can assess the sustainability according to the legislation that we have, so many decisions have been taken that the sustainability and environmental assessments are nothing better than a post hoc justification of the decisions that have been taken. So you end up looking at, for example, Thames Tideway. They have an ambition in their environmental statement to plant more trees than they cut down. Well, it's an interceptor sewer through London. It's not going to be difficult to plant more trees than you cut down, because there aren't many trees being cut down, and there are plenty of opportunities to plant more trees. That's got almost nothing to do with sustainability.
After understanding about the barriers, let us move on to possible measures that we can take to overcome these barriers in implementing sustainable practices in construction. Understanding what sustainability truly means. Firstly, we need to understand that sustainability has 3 dimensions to it: social, environmental, and economic. To implement a holistic sustainable practice, all 3 dimensions should be concurrently considered. Apply sustainability principles through the entire life cycle of construction as part of co-design process from planning to disposal, and not consider it to be just an add-on step at the end of design process. Professor Guthrie talks on how to make the idea of sustainability integral to design process at every step.
Core module. And more importantly, when anything around materials or energy or infrastructure is being taught, there's usually very little attention paid to If this were to be more genuinely more sustainable, how would this piece of infrastructure or this material look? So if you were, for example, teaching people to design a new high-speed railway, you would teach them to start from the position of what are the sustainable development goals, the 17 sustainable development goals. How does that apply to the national plan in a particular country? How does that play out in terms of service delivery, economic activity, social benefit, and environmental impact? And then from that consideration of sustainability as a first move, the top of the agenda would be to identify the sustainable development ambition for that region or country, and then allow the infrastructure or the materials to emerge from that policy.
Now let's talk about the role of government and decision makers. Governments should move from policy-based evidence making to evidence-based policy making, which means governments should base their policies on scientific research and proven evidence and not the other way around.
And I've been on the Science Advisory Council at DEFRA for 6 years, and we worked with the chief scientist there and the government's chief scientist. And all through that time, all we ever felt was frustration that when we could produce evidence around a policy area, it was trumped literally by political direction and dogma. So we may be moving to a time when science and scientific evidence, supported by environmental crises like the bushfires in Australia and California and so on, we might be moving to a world where we accept that some science may be helpful in formulating policy, but it's taken 20 years, 30 years to be able to even think that that might be happening. Whereas all the science that we needed and all the evidence that we needed was available about 40 years ago.
Let's talk about the roles of architects and designers in implementing sustainable practices. Most architects do follow basic principles like making responsible choice of materials, designing to reduce overall energy consumption in lighting, insulation, air conditioning, etc. Many architects still believe that reducing construction waste in the industry is still a challenge, but this can be overcome by following some practices like prefabrication, as Mr. Simon suggests. Prefabrication allows for manufacturing construction materials in standardized sizes in factories. These materials could follow standard manufacturing processes, have standard sizes and installation methods. This means high quality materials which can be easily installed with no modifications and hence less wastage.
Fabrication, of course, that is one of the positives of prefabricated construction. So building in a factory off-site, the idea of being able to control the materials that are being used a lot more. The quality is meant to be improved because it's being done under a factory condition rather than out on site with the rain and the wind and so that's one option that would probably be quite an efficient way of reducing waste. And I think from the designer's point of view, from an architect's point of view, if you're doing prefabricated elements, you can draw those up quite, you will be drawing those elements up very accurately, and there will be a complete understanding of how much material is going into that object, which then manufacturers can sort of try and accommodate within their standard sizes. And, I mean, that's another thing within architecture. Something we try and do is when you're looking at designing, say, a facade of a building or even internally, if you know what standard sizes things come in, whether it's sheets of ply or whether it's pieces of stone or slabs, is to try and work with that module, and design in a way that you don't have lots of cut. I mean, it's horrible to see. If you're using concrete shuttering, for example, and the idea of cutting loads of plywood panels to a certain module so that it fits, rather than just using the standard panel size and not having any offcuts, is obviously worlds apart.
Kit-based construction approach. Another innovative approach to reduce waste and promote reusing in the construction industry is the kit-based construction method, which Mr. John Nicole is passionate about.
As I say, with the kit approach, I feel you could have maybe a structural frame that is permanent, or even that's adaptable. But obviously, the bits that you clip on, services inside, components on the outside, can all be changed or renewed. So if you have a panel system that's painted and maybe the paint finish is all gone after 40 years, you could just renew the panel. This is the approach I'd like to see. And I believe also that with panel systems, often like the strips that join the panels don't have a very long life, like the gaskets as they call them. So this sort of thing, you need to have an approach where parts of the system can be taken down and put back together and just refurbished.
The figure shown here could be an example of kit building approach which follows module-based construction. In the left part of the figure, different modules like walls, windows, wall tiles, floors, etc. are manufactured as separate pieces or modules in factories and then transported to the site. In the right side, you can see that these modules are stacked on site like Lego pieces. So the advantages of this building approach would be standardization and prefabrication, which will reduce the cost, easy replacement and removal of structural elements, reusing structural parts, which in turn reduces manufacturing. Overall, it could be considered as a low-energy construction in every step. To conclude, I believe a combination of these points should bring about positive change in the construction industry in terms of following sustainable practices. To begin with, the construction industry should understand and follow sustainability concept in every step of design process from planning to execution. Also, it should have a holistic view of the concept in terms of social, economic, and environmental aspects as explained earlier. Secondly, practice construction methods like prefabrication, kit-based building approach, which can promote recycling and standardization and bring about huge reduction in the construction waste. Finally, government and policymakers should come up with stronger policies to follow sustainable practices in the construction industry and put the larger interests of society and environment as top priority before it's too late.